In the heart of a golden land, where the river stretched like a living ribbon across endless sands, the map makers of old did not simply chart the earth. They captured the heavens, the gods, and the journey of the soul. Their maps were spells, their maps were prayers, and sometimes their maps were warnings. Hello adventurers and welcome back to the Red Quills. My name is Ryan and today we are embarking on our next arc in the Red Quills. What we're doing for these next few weeks is examining the different kinds of maps that we can encounter through history, what they can tell us about map making and world building, and how we can make maps of their individual styles. And we're starting this week with a map in the style of ancient Egypt. I've taken a few historical examples, a few artistic liberties, and created something that's a little bit of a quest, a little bit of the world, and a little bit of an actual map. We're going to talk about how you can use the techniques that the ancient Egyptians put into their own texts, their hieroglyphics, their pictograms, their understanding of mythology and the way the world was created and is explored, and how you can use that to flesh out your own D&D world, expand upon it, and make something that feels like it is grounded in reality and mythology. And by the end of this video, we'll have discussed how the ancient Egyptian maps are different from the ones in our world today, how you can use that to create your worlds, how you can build something that's a bit less GPS and more Book of the Dead. And I'll give you the example that I've created as well as a few ideas for adventures, quests, and world building. So let's see how we go. Let's start by talking about why ancient Egyptian maps are so powerful and so different from the modern day maps. Because ancient Egyptian maps, I will say straight up, they don't have maps really as we consider them now. Ancient maps did exist around that time, but they were more mythological interpretations of the world and less geographical representations of the ground. Unlike modern maps, which sort of prioritize accurate measurements and scalable navigation, they were more about the concept of the journey, the idea that you're not moving from point A to point B, you're moving from birth to death and something else afterwards. So we're going to take some ideas from what few maps did exist. We're going to take some ideas from the Book of the Dead. We're going to take some ideas from the star charts that they've carved into the roofs of the tombs, and a couple of contemporary ideas in maps that they have then, and create something that feels like it's old and vast and mythological, that leads you from a world which is mundane, which we see in the modern day, in which a desert is just a desert and a river is just a river, into the ancient Egyptian concept of the world as a metaphor. The desert is a barrier between life and chaos. The river is the literal bloodstream of the world. You aren't just moving from one city to another. You are moving from life into spirituality as you go. So stealing a few ideas from the ancient Egyptians to create a map that feels vast and old and explorable is a fantastic idea. Let's do it. All right, it is time to pull a few examples straight from history because you know me, I love to reference maps that have existed in the past and in fiction so that we can really do this. And in this case, for this series, I'm basing it entirely on historical records. Nothing in fiction, just what can be found in archaeological excavations. So we are going to start with the Papyrus of Ani, the Book of the Dead. It's from around 1250 BCE. It is probably the most famous example of ancient Egyptian mythology. The Book of the Dead, as a concept, resonates for modern mythology and throughout history as being something that's so iconic in our understanding of the afterlife, of magic, of spells, and of protection. The idea of moving through the duat, this sort of flowing current that leads from birth through into the afterlife after death, and how you can protect yourself against the things that will prey upon you post-death is so powerful. And it is, look, it's extremely old. We're talking, nearly 3,500 years old. So a lot of it has been lost to time, but that which has been translated is very important. And more importantly, you can see how it's been visually constructed as a guide. They are used to educate people who can't necessarily read on what will happen via showing the story rather than just writing the story. And that's a trick that we're going to be using in our own maps as well. All right, now there is an actual map from ancient Egypt. It's not one that we would consider to be as useful as or as accurate as modern maps. It's certainly not a GPS map, but the Turin papyrus map from the reign of Ramesses IV is a great example of their actual style of navigation. Certainly they would have had more maps than have survived into the current era that were usable for them as surveyors and officials moving through the kingdom, understanding what it looked like from a distance. And this is a map of a quarry. You can see that it has mining sites. It has roads that don't necessarily follow logical structures. They're more metaphorical demonstrations of moving from point A to point B. It has mountains, but again, in that sort of style of showing you the concept of a mountain without actually giving you a topographical representation of what that mountain really looks like on the flat of the earth. And so our takeaway for that map from that idea of real Egyptian cartography is that they prioritize the concept over the physical structure. They want to show what it feels like and not necessarily what it looks like. We're going to take that and use it to create our own map. Because the last one we're going to take directly from, honestly, one of the most lasting structures of the ancient Egyptians, which is the tomb art. So we're going to go to the tomb of Senenmut, which is from about 1500 BCE. He is the architect and the steward of Queen Hatshepsut, and he has a tomb that is absolutely covered in designs, one of which is a star chart. They have some metaphorical representations of moving from life to death. They have a lot of iconography, pictography, and hieroglyphics that we can use as the basis for this map. So using those three, which is the Book of the Dead, which is the Papyrus of Ani, the Turin papyrus map of the quarry, and the tomb of Senenmut, we can create something that feels like it's from ancient Egypt using their stylistic references and that duality, that concept, that exploration of the duad to create something that is interesting and dynamic. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to prepare the concept that we're creating. In this case, because of the duality that the ancient Egyptians really pursued, that concept of the separation between life and death, how life is filled with events and activities and so is death, I want a map that represents both. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to measure out the paper that we're using. I'm going to get the concept down on paper. So I'm going to use the white A2 180 GSM paper that I tend to use for all my watercolor paintings, and I'm going to go and get a piece of black paper from one of my previous maps, the map of the astral tree. You can check that out above. And I'm going to make this map a mirror image. Above, on the white paper, will be the journey of the soul towards the afterlife, the various challenges that you face in order as a mortal to access the afterlife. And beneath will be the opposite of that, how someone can get back to the land of the living from the land of the dead. Now, what we're going to do for this map is we're actually going to keep it separate from ancient Egyptian mythology, because of course they had heaps and heaps and heaps of myths and legends and understandings about the duat and what to expect. And there's so much there that I really don't have time to get into, and we're designing a D&D map. So I'm just going to kind of take the core concepts and create something original. If you want to create your own based on their kind of ideas, if you want the sun barge, if you want, the fields of wheat, in this case, we're just going to make the map based on the concepts so that I can pull it into a D&D campaign. So once I've measured out the paper, the areas that I want to be using, the white and the black, the life and the death, I'm going to measure out the proportions of the iconography they're going to encounter along the way, using that kind of idea that you want to represent what it is metaphorically rather than what it is physically. The size of the icons that they will encounter represent their importance. And I want to make that symmetrical. So I'm measuring out the icons above to match the icons below, the same size, the same significance and importance, which of course means that if you flip the map, which is the idea in the end, so that you can read it upside down depending upon which way you want to go, back from death towards life or towards death from life, it gives you sort of that idea of a mirror image. It's mirrored above and below, it's mirrored left to right. So the first step was setting out the idea, the measurements, the symmetry of the map. The second part of making the map is deciding what iconography you want to use. So in this case, I'm going to be taking concepts directly from tomb walls, from the hieroglyphics, from the iconography that they've got there. So I have a similar style of palm, a similar style of tree and boats and fortresses. I'm going to take a picture of Horus directly from the tomb walls. I've got some pyramids, some mountains, And as we go through, I'll be adding in hieroglyphics that kind of depict this a little bit more. But the idea is that I'm basing it directly upon the concepts that I'm getting from the tomb walls and from the papyruses. As I'm going through, I'm also thinking about how this is going to be structured, because it is, of course, a quest map. This isn't a regional map. If you want a regional map that is navigable for your own world, you're really just going to be taking the same kind of idea of a kingdom map and just adding in ancient Egyptian, symbols and hieroglyphics to make that feel a bit more standard. If you're interested in that, do stick it in the comments below. I can make a map like that. This is just a map that is true to the culture of ancient Egypt. They don't necessarily need something super complicated as a world map. You can just navigate on the ground using that. Or you can take, as I did, concepts from the Turin Papyrus. But this is a reference to their culture as well as the world that they lived in. So by this point, we've got above and below, we've got the symbols. I'm going to add in some color. I'm going to use watercolors to do that. I want it to be bright and colorful above. I want to use the sun and the moon to really push that symmetry home so that people who look at the map can absolutely immediately sense that you can flip that upside down. So you move from morning to evening above, and you move from a full moon to no moon below. So I'm going to be going through and embedding myths directly into the map itself. So we're starting with the Guard of the Dawn. We've got that idea that you start at dawn and you move towards dusk. So then we go through, and I'm referencing classic ancient Egyptian concepts here. We've got the pyramid, we've got a city, I've got the gates and the obelisk and the half-faced, which is, obviously an image of Osiris that I've kind of altered for my own purposes. And we've got 3 mountains there. And what we're going to do is I'm going to create a little pathway within each of the mountains that they can use to navigate through them. That's to give you as a DM the idea that each of those mountains is a dungeon in and of its own right, getting more and more complex. I've also added some symbols in. They don't directly reference anything on the map. That's just the opportunity for you to put in particular trials or items that you need to pick up on the way. I'm going to be using color watercolors above and black ink to show that kind of that high definition, that contrast, that saturation that comes with life. And underneath, I'm going to be using a white pencil and a white pen to really offset that. I'm going to use the idea of symmetry, the same proportions above and below. I'm going to mirror a couple of things. So for instance, you can see the gate of the sun above has the small guard at the bottom. And on the flip side, in the darker part of the map, it's got a large guard and then a gate between his feet. So you've mirrored that, you've switched that kind of concept. So then I'm going to come through and I'm going to actually start writing in things. You've used the symbols to tell the story as close as you possibly can. That's the minimum that your players will need. Think of it in that way. You want to kind of use the symbols to show them the story and then annotate that using the words. Don't use the words to really give them critical information, just to expand upon the icons that you've already got. If you remove the words and they can still get the kind of concept of the map, then you've done a good job. If you remove the words and they have no idea what's going on and they can't possibly figure it out, then you need to think a little bit more about adding in some concepts there. Because what I'm going to do when I'm writing in the wording, I'm going to use the style of hieroglyphics from the walls. I'm going to use a combination of pictograms and words. So I'm going to use this black pen. It's got a pointed tip, so I can use that to make different thicknesses. I'm going to use a font that's kind of reminiscent of that ancient sort of flowing text, that Arabic kind of style. And I'm going to use that in combination with, and I'm going to just point this out here, I don't actually know the meaning of hieroglyphics. I did at one point in the distant past, but I have forgotten that. So I'm just going to kind of use them as pictograms to directly represent concepts rather than as I know they have the separate, syllabic meanings for ancient Egyptians. So, the rising sun represents the rising sun and not the concepts that it would have done in ancient Egypt. Because once that's all done and I go through and I'm going to add some highlights using gold pen, I'm going to use some of that UV ink that I used for the black map, the map of the astral tree, to give it a little bit of pop, give it a little bit of color. Use some white pen on the border there as well. So you've got this map in the end that is expansive and conceptual and is a journey. It's a quest map in the best possible way. All right, so here are the things to remember about making an ancient Egyptian map like this. I'm going to put them really fast. I'm going to make a list, so take notes. Here's the first one. You want a sacred axis. You want the idea that it moves from one point to another. In my particular map, that sacred axis horizontally is the river. It moves from life to death and death to life in either directions. The second thing to remember is the orientation of the map. It doesn't necessarily point north, so where does it point? It points to the sky, it points to the ground, the separation between life and death, that kind of thing. Third is scale by symbolism. As you can see by the iconography that I put on the map itself, the more important things are larger. Think about that when you're creating your own map. The most important things are big, don't necessarily scale up as you go. It can be relative to the point of the quest that you're currently on. So the Guard of the Dawn might not be as difficult at the start of the quest as the half-faced is at the end, but for where you are, he presents a considerable challenge, or he's worthy of respect, or he's very important in the afterlife, that kind of thing. Think about how myths and the land, or the physical representation of the world, are connected. What does the desert represent? What do the trees represent? What does the water represent? It's all kind of coming together in this sort of reflection of metaphor and physical meaning. Then you can think about artistic decoration. Don't use that as how you connect your map primarily to the culture that you're exposing yourself to, because that's only going to create a very surface level understanding of the world. Then you want to come in and you add your artistic decoration. Leave it towards the end. Don't rely on that as the hinge point of how you're connecting your campaign to an ancient culture, because it's going to create a very shallow understanding of the world. If you just make a map as we currently make a map, and then just add in concepts of what this ancient culture looks like later on, it's going to create some inconsistencies in your world building. Think about it from the beginning and add the artistic sort of stylizations later on. And then the last thing to remember, the most important thing about when you make a map from ancient Egypt, is it must represent a journey. All maps for them represent a journey from this point A to point B, from life towards death. Even the map of the quarry from the Turin Papyrus, it shows how to get there and how to get back. It is not a standard, static GPS concept of creating a physical plane. It is about a journey. So how does your map show that journey in a way that is true to their style and their culture? Okay, it's a simple kind of concept. It's not necessarily what we would do for a world, but that makes it all the more powerful for world building, and it will bring your players into it if they can encounter something like this that helps them to see the world through an entirely different lens than what they are used to. It will help them to explore the world building that you've created. So I've created this map. It is available for free for download on my Patreon channel. You can check that out in the link in the description below. As always, you can check out practically every map that I make for this channel. If you want me to make like a stylized, above world static map in an ancient Egyptian style, let me know in the comments. I can talk about how we can use ancient Egyptian symbols and hieroglyphics in that kind of way, but this is kind of to give you an idea of making a map that is true to their understanding of the world, their culture, their world building, that kind of thing as well. So let me know in the comments if you do want that. As always, if you've got any questions, just come and chat to me. You can check out the Discord as well. I'm on there, most days. You can always come and ask me a question. Feel free to tag me. Link to that is in the description below as well. And I wanted to give you guys a challenge. As I'm going through this week, firstly, let me know if you have any specific cultures that you want me to do. I have my own list of things that I want to do. I want to do, I want to do ancient Egypt. I want to do Rome. I want to do, the Han Dynasty in China. Mayan based on the calendar system. I want to do all sorts of things, and I think that it's going to be really interesting. But I want to hear what you want me to do, what you're interested in exploring, any challenges that you have in your world building. I'm always happy to discuss this. But a challenge for you is to choose a culture that you want to explore in your world, that you've based your world building on, and see how you can create a map like this, directly based not only on their art and their maps of their time, but upon their culture, their understanding of the world. And post it to the Discord. I would love to see what you create. As always, it's just an absolute joy to have this community. I'm very, very grateful to everyone. So ancient Egypts and their maps have reminded us to see maps not just as the idea of moving from point A to point B, but as a story tool. Moving through the world is a story in and of itself, and it does remind us that a map is a crucial piece of telling that story. It's been wonderful to make this video. As always, I am so so grateful to have, you know, my wonderful patrons. An absolute shout out to all of those. I'm so humbled to have this community around me. So until next time, I will see you next week when we explore how to create an ancient Roman map based upon their artwork and their contemporary maps as well. So until then, happy map making, and I'll see you then. Let's start. Hatshepsut, yeah. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a and it will in the end undermine your Is it simple? Depends. Okay, it's a simple kind of concept.